going to start with a very short slideshow. I promise it's going to be really short and brief, just because I want to make sure there's a few things that you don't miss out on. So first of all, we are of course talking about Nik Collection version 2. This is a nice little update, and I'm going to tell you everything that is in here. We're going to take a quick look at it all. So you've got in here, in case you're not familiar with the Nik plugin suite, you have a series of plugins which include Define, which is all about noise reduction, Viveza, which is about color correction, kind of corrective color work, a sharpener for sharpening, output sharpening specifically for going to print, Color Effects Pro, which is creative color work, whereas Viveza is more corrective, Silver Effects Pro, which is of course for black and white conversion, one of my personal favorites. Love Silver Effects Pro, HDR Effects Pro for doing HDR blends, and we are actually going to do a little bit with HDR Pro, but using a single image, which is a kind of an unusual way to use it, but you certainly can. And then Analog Effects Pro, which gives you the ability to make very analog, i.e. film looking type of images. Super fun to play with in there. Now, as always, the Nik plugins are compatible with the Adobe suite, meaning that you can use these as plugins for Adobe Photoshop or Photoshop Elements. You can use it as a plugin for Lightroom Classic. You cannot, however, use it as a plugin for Lightroom CC. Used to be Lightroom CC, now it's just called Lightroom Desktop or Lightroom Mobile, and that's only because Adobe has not yet opened up the architecture for plugins. However, I am going to show you how you can still use the plugins if you are using Lightroom Desktop, CC, mobile, well, not mobile because it's not iOS, but Lightroom on the desktop, the cloud version. So I'll be showing you that as well, because there is a way to still do it. Just in case you don't know Nik plugins at all, one of the things that sets these apart from everything else is something called Viewpoint technology. The Viewpoint technology is an ability to make a very quick and very accurate mask, so you can isolate specific areas of your picture without having to use brushes, without any edge detection. It simply builds the mask based off of chrominance and luminance, that's the color and the brightness values of the pixel area that you select initially, and it builds a mask based off of that. You'll see this in action. If you've never seen it before, it will blow your mind. It's just super powerful and cool. Now, inside of the new Nik Collection 2, one of the big things is the series of new presets. Now, at first you think, okay, it's got new presets, but the new presets are actually really sweet. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as we go, but I want to make sure that you kind of understand and appreciate the value of a really good preset. A really good preset does two things. It can inspire you. It gives you inspiration for an image. So you have a photo, you don't really know exactly what you're going to do with it. You open it up in the plugins, and you start clicking on presets, and you go, nah, ooh, what's that? That's really cool. And it inspires you to take that image down a new path. And that's, for me personally, I use presets all the time like that. I've been doing this forever, and I still use presets all the time for inspiration. The second really great use of presets is as a learning tool. It is a fantastic way to learn how a tool works, how the software works, how the different settings work. If you just drag a tool on and you start dragging sliders around, you don't get anything cool, then you kind of just discard it and move on to something else, and you think, well, that's not a very good filter. But if you have a preset that all put together makes something really cool, and then you go and you break it down, you go, oh, I never thought of combining these three sliders in that way. That's what gives me this result. It's just a great way to learn how the tool works. There are, as I said, 42 new presets. They're broken into these groups. There's 10 new presets each in Color Effects Pro, Silver Effects Pro, and Analog Effects Pro, and then 12 new presets in HDR Effects Pro. For Windows users out there, you will be very happy to see this. You now have high DPI support, meaning that your interface of the Nik plugins now looks like it should on a modern high-resolution, high DPI screen. If you've been using a high DPI screen for a while and you've been frustrated about that, that is now addressed in this version. Mac users have had that for a while now. It's just one of those things that once Google got their hands on it, they didn't really do anything with it. So now that it's in DxO's hands, a lot more is happening. Now, one of the biggest pieces of news about this is that the Nik Collection now includes PhotoLab 2.3 Essentials Edition. Now, this is more than just a bundled piece of software that comes with it. This is essentially freedom from a subscription-based service. Now, I love Adobe and I use Adobe products all the time. However, it is worth acknowledging that a lot of people don't want to pay subscription services, and they don't want to have to pay a monthly fee for Photoshop or for Lightroom Classic just to be able to use the Nik plugins. So now when you purchase the Nik software version 2, you get PhotoLab the version 2.3 Essentials Edition included with it, which is a full raw decoder. It gives you full raw decode capabilities with viewpoint technology built into it, and we're going to take a look at that. And you now have a complete from raw to delivery solution without any monthly subscription, without having to pay anything additional because it comes with. So that's pretty exciting addition to this. Also, if you haven't seen Nik PhotoLab before, not Nik, sorry, the DxO PhotoLab before, one new feature that's in there too is a simple little button that's a Nik Collection button that just gets you quickly into the Nik plugin. So obviously we'll be seeing that. And that's it. So I promised, very short little slideshow in there. So let's get this thing started with the software that it comes with, PhotoLab. So here's a basic tour of what PhotoLab is. This is a huge app. I could spend hours just in here. We're not going to do that. But I want to give you some basics idea of what it is. It is, as I said, a fully developed raw developer. It is a full-fledged raw development tool. You can open any raw photo in here, do your basic processing, do some advanced processing, and deliver it from there or send it to plugins, whatever you'd like. It is, to a degree, an asset management tool, but it does not have a library like something like Lightroom would have. In fact, if you look over here on the left under the Photo Library tab, it says Photo Library. It kind of is a library, but what it's really doing is simply looking at your hard drive. You have all of your folders in your hard drive. You can add favorites. You can get to things quickly. And it is just looking at the content of your hard drive. There's no separate library database that's being built up. In fact, when you make a change to an image, everything in here is non-destructive, of course. When you make a change to an image, it creates a small metadata file that sits next to the original raw file that contain all the instructions. So next time you look at the photo in PhotoLab, it sees that file, the sidecar file, recognizes what's been done to it, and applies all those effects. So this way you don't have to have a separate asset management tool. This just takes a look at what's on your hard drive. If you go into the Customize tab here, this is where we get into editing the tool, editing the photos, and you'll see on the left you have a basic navigation, your EXIF viewer, some presets, and then over here on the right is where all the magic happens. And we have all the different tools in here to choose from. Again, full-fledged editor. Now, just in the event, for anybody out there who's not really familiar with the idea of what a raw editor is or does or why you need it or the significance of it, I want to make an analogy here that will help anybody who's unclear about raw to understand things. Raw images are quite literally, as it sounds, raw data. That data has to be translated into an image that you see on the screen before you. Every software, every company that builds a raw decoder builds them a little bit differently, which means when you open your raw photo in any number of raw decoders, whether that is Adobe Photoshop, whether it's DxO PhotoLab, whether it's Apple Photos, whether it's Capture One, they're all going to look a little bit different. It's still the same photo, but it's going to look different. And the analogy that I like to make is ingredients for making a cake. If you take flour and sugar and water or milk or whatever you're going to take, and you give that to 5 different bakers, you're going to get 5 different cakes. Right? They're all going to make something a little bit different. It's their interpretation of it. Raw decoding is the same thing. It's a different interpretation. So when you first open a photo in this app, it is probably going to look a little bit different than it did in any other app. And hopefully you're going to like the way it looks here more than others. And that's, of course, the idea. Now, every tool that does a raw decode has, in addition to that, your exposure adjustments, highlight shadow adjustments, and vignetting, and all these other things that are in there, all these tools that are in there. And those tools are what tends to set different raw processing apps apart. One of the things that PhotoLab does is it will automatically apply what is called a DxO preset to every image when you first open it. Now, you can disable this if you wanted to, but think of the initial preset as being kind of a magic wand, but it's much more than that in that it really analyzes the image and does a lot to it to make it look even better. So here's the example image I'm going to start with. You pull up this photo over here on the left, and let me do a quick reset on here. And first, looking at this image, we can see that it is quite dark, especially in the background. There's a lot of really dark shadows in the background. The foreground is nicely exposed. The midground maybe ever so slightly underexposed. But overall, I mean, it's a pretty well balanced image as far as your darkest shadows have detail, your highlights have detail, and so on. This is, you saw that I hit the reset button. This is how we start in here, but it is not the initial raw decode. If I go up here in the top right corner to the presets menu, and I look at these presets here, you'll see DxO Standard, neutral colors, black and white, and no correction. This thing DxO Standard over there, that is the default. That is the what happens to your image when you first open it. And you can actually change that. You could have basically any preset applied that you want when you first open an image. But by default, when you first install the software, what it installs is DxO standard. But over here on the right, you'll see this one that says no correction. So if I click on that, it's actually going to remove everything and show me what the raw file looked like when it was first brought in. And this is what it was. And now we can see that the original image here was actually a fair bit underexposed. The shadows are so dark that there's no detail. The foreground, even the foreground is actually a little bit on the dark side. It is an underexposed image. And if I was going to take a traditional approach to this, the first thing I'll probably do is grab the exposure slider. So I'll do that. I'll go over here to exposure compensation, grab the slider, start dragging it up. And by the time I start to get some detail into the background in there, we can see that the foreground is looking a little bit bright, a little bit washed out. My colors have gotten muddy, and just overall, it clearly needs a lot more work. Sure, I brought shadow detail up, but I'm going to have to do a lot more to make this actually look good. Or instead of playing with exposure, I could go in here and use something called smart lighting. Now, smart lighting is, as the name implies, it is a smart lighting tool that will simultaneously pull up your shadows, pull down your highlights, or pull down the highlights if it's needed, and keep your midtones protected, keep the saturation even, keep the contrast even, and generally do what it can to balance out the image. If it needs more shadow or less shadow or more highlight or less highlight exposure detail, it's going to do that. It's a smart tool that analyzes the photo and makes the appropriate needed changes. And it works really, really well. So with a quick slide of the slider there, you see that we've done one thing in there, balance the exposure out a bit more. But by doing the basic DxO standard preset that gets applied by default, it does smart lighting as well as a bunch of other stuff, so that once again, if I hit the reset button, we end up with an image that looks like this. And so now we have something that just looks more balanced, overall a better image. Cool. So that's one of the big advantages of using PhotoLab. Now, another thing you can do in PhotoLab that is totally unique to it is use viewpoints on the raw image. Now remember, we talked about viewpoints a little bit in the slideshow, and that's something that's built into the Nik software suite. However, now the viewpoint technology is also built into PhotoLab itself. And the key here is that you're applying it to a raw image, and that's the key here. That's what makes this so special. So let's do this. I'm going to enable that by going into local adjustments up here. Click on local adjustments. It changes the interface a little bit. You see the cursor has changed to this little crosshair. Before I add anything, if I right click anywhere on the scene, you'll see this tool palette pop up that allows me to choose what type of local adjustment I want to do. I can do a brush. You can do standard brushing in here if you want to. I can, there's a standard brush, there's an auto mask, which is an edge detect brush. I can do gradiated filters if I want to. But the key here, what I really want, is this control point, which is the viewpoint technology. So the way that I apply this is I click on an area that represents what I want to change, and it builds the mask for me. In this case, I want to make the foreground here a little bit darker. So I'm just going to click on the wood there. Let's make this area of influence, if you will, a little bit bigger. And right now we're not seeing anything because I haven't actually adjusted any of the sliders, but I want to know what is being affected, what area is being affected. And to see that, down here, you have a little button that says Show Masks. If I click that, it turns this into a black and white mask view. So now I can see what is being affected in here. You can see that the wood on there, the surface of the bench or the table there, is primarily what's being affected. A little bit on the sides here, you can see these areas here that are darker or different color and not being affected. And so that is that mask being built. And I can, of course, make this bigger or smaller as I want to affect more or less of the surrounding area. Let me go ahead and turn off the show masks and now just go in here and make a change. I'll go to the exposure adjustment, take that down a little bit, and darken that down. And of course, again, if I want to make that a little bit bigger, control a larger area, I can do that. And now I've very neatly darkened the top of that surface while protecting the areas around it that I don't want to. Another example is, we're just going to do one more on here. I'll click on new mask, and you see we've got this red bag. Let me zoom in a little bit closer on here. This red bag over its head. Let's say that I decide that that red bag is a little bit too saturated, it's a little bit distracting. So I'm going to click on the red bag. Let's make this mask a little bit smaller and turn on the show masks. And we can see here that it is affecting just that red bag. And as I move this around, even though I'm in the mask mode, I can see exactly what's being affected. Right? If I drag this over to his face, we'll see that it's his face that's getting selected, or that side of his face. The blue bag behind him, I could isolate that very easily. But it's the red bag that I want, so I'll move this around and make sure we got a good, reasonable representation of that red bag being selected. Looks good there. Hide the mask. Go into the color version of these tools, and I'll take the saturation, here we go, and pull that down just to desaturate that red bag. So just kind of take some of the emphasis off of that. And that's it. That's all there is to it. Super, super straightforward and easy. But again, we are doing this entirely to the raw file. We have not rendered this out as a TIFF or anything else yet. So big part of the power in here. Last thing I want to show you about the PhotoLab itself is one of the other corrective tools in here. And for this, I'm going to use a different photo. Let's scroll over and find this one. Here it is. And this photo right now looks pretty even. It looks, the lines are relatively straight. We're looking through this archway at night and everything's straight up and down. But this is not the way the image started. If I go in here and I disable the distortion, and this distortion dialog, this distortion tool is completely automated. You see the correction is based on a DxO module. Now, DxO module is internal code that is unique to every camera and lens combination. Let that sink in. For every camera and lens combination, there is a unique module that says when you take this camera and this lens and you put them together, this is the type of distortion that you're going to need to correct, and that is what this is doing for us. If I disable this, you can see what the image looks like without the correction, and you can see that there's a bit of pincushion distortioning happening. It's a very wide angle field of view lens. We're getting some distortion, so this tool has gone in there and corrected that for me automatically. And this is enormous. This is a really huge thing when you take in your images shot on really wide lenses and you get this funky distortion in there. This will correct it. And there's more that you can do in here to correct as well, but that is your basic automatic level of corrections in there. Right, now, again, tons more about PhotoLab. We don't have time to get into all of that, but it is now included with Nik, the Nik Collection version 2. But now let's get into the Nik Collection version 2, shall we? I'm going to start with this image. We're going to go to this photo here. Our holy man in India there having a puff of his cigarette. And down here on the bottom right, you'll see this button that says Nik Collection. When I click on that, it opens up a new little dialog here that gives me access to all of the Nik filters. There's also a settings button in here that will allow me to change how this image will be handed off to the Nik tools. The Nik tools themselves are not raw decoders. They do not handle a raw image, so you have to send a TIFF file or a JPEG file if you want to those. In here, you choose how you want that TIFF or JPEG to be rendered. So you can choose TIFF or JPEG. Honestly, I don't know why you would ever choose JPEG. I've yet to find a use case where that makes sense. Generally, you want to have the best quality possible until your final output, so we're just going to leave it at TIFF. And you can choose between 8 and 16-bit. If your photo is relatively flat, you are nowhere near the black and the white edges of your photo, and you don't plan on pushing it that far out, then you can set it to 8-bit and save some storage space. But honestly, storage is cheap. I don't even bother ever switching it. I always just leave it in 16-bit, and that's going to give me more flexibility down the road. That's just me, but I think it's probably good advice for most users. If your computer's older and slower, you might want to set it to 8-bit, but again, I probably wouldn't. You could actually also change the size in here at this point. Again, I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. And that's pretty basically all we got. So let's hit OK on there. And we're going to take this one into Color Efex Pro 4. So what it's doing now is rendering out that TIFF that we need. It is going to render it and save it next to the raw file, the original raw file, and it's going to open that up in the plugin. And while that is all happening, I'm going to take a quick look over in the questions and see if there's anything that I need to address. So lots of hellos in there. Hello. Here is a question. First one from Barry Sharoff. Can Nik Collection 2 work in Lightroom without first transferring an image to PhotoLab 2? Absolutely, like you used to be able to, and as it does in Photoshop Elements. Okay, so I'm not an Elements user. I don't know what that workflow is, but from Lightroom Classic, you absolutely can open straight into a plugin, and we're going to see that a little bit later today. If you're using with Lightroom CC, you have to go through Photoshop, and I'm going to show you that as well, but you do not have to go through PhotoLab. That is an option. So if you had an image that had some level of distortion that you just weren't really working out inside of Lightroom, or maybe you wanted to have better noise removal, or any of the other things that you can do in PhotoLab, you could take that raw file, send it to PhotoLab, do your processing there, and then send it to the plugin. Absolutely fine workflow, but for most users, most of the time, from Lightroom Classic, you're just going to go straight into the plugin. Okay, we'll come back to the questions later. For now, let's get back to the image. All right, we are in Color Efex Pro 4 here. You have on the left-hand side, I'm going to give you a quick tour of the interface itself here, just in case you're new to it. On the left-hand side, you have a column here that looks like this is the main thing, but if you look closely at the top, you'll see it says Filter Library. If I click on that, now we see all the filters that we actually have in here. Tons and tons of filters that can be used. Now, each one of these filters can be used in combination with any of the others. In fact, you can even add multiple instances of the same filter. And the way that the workflow works in here is if I click on any filter, like Brilliance and Warmth, over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that it's now been added. There's Brilliance and Warmth that has been added to my filter stack. Okay, I go back over here and I go, let's try Cross Balance. I click on that. and now cross balance is here. But you notice that the previous one, the brilliance and warmth, is now gone. Okay, so I go down here, let's try film grain. I add that, it's added film grain, but the previous ones are gone. So whenever you click on one of these filters, it replaces what was currently active on the right-hand side. If you want to add another filter to it, at the bottom of this here, you'll see it says add filter. You click on add filter, it adds an empty filter holder, if you will. So there's the film grain, there's an empty filter holder. And now I go over here and I say, let's add dark contrast. And then I'll add another filter and go over here and we'll add low key, which is probably going to be a terrible combination, frankly. But we add the different filters in here that we want. If you come up with a combination you love, you can save this as a preset, which inside of these plugins is called a recipe, save recipe. Of course, the cool thing here is that there are already a bunch of recipes made, including the new recipes, the new presets, the En Vogue collection. So let's skip past the filter library and go back down into the recipes. And from the recipes, you'll see here, you have different categories in here. I'm looking at the new En Vogue ones, and here are the different recipes. And every time I click one of these, it replaces everything over here on the right. It's a whole new collection of filters that are being added to the right. And so this is where we get into what I was talking about earlier about the presets, the recipes being really, really good inspiration. You bring a photo like this in and you think, I know I want to do something, but I just don't know what I want to do yet. I'm going to keep on clicking on things until I see something that inspires me and makes me go, ooh, yeah, that's a nice idea. But maybe that's not the end result. I still want to adjust it, which of course I can, but it's a starting point. And I love, love, love that about using presets. So I'm going to go for this one here called soft mute. We'll start with soft mute. Okay, so now I want to look at how soft mute was made. All right, I want to see how it was made, and I want to learn more about how these tools work. So back over to the right-hand side, you'll see that this one is made out of 3 different adjustments, 3 different filters. You got duplex, classical soft focus, and infrared film. Okay, well, let's just start turning them on and off individually and see what they do. I turn off infrared film, and it's actually a pretty minor effect on this one. It's some kind of a brightening effect, but not a whole lot. Okay, maybe we'll come back to that later. Maybe not. It's not doing too much to it. How about classical soft focus? It's kind of, you can see it's definitely softening it, but it's not like a massive effect. But I like the idea of a soft focus. So let's take a closer look at it. I'm going to zoom in. In fact, I'm going to zoom into 200%. Let's really get in there. And turn that on and off again. And you can kind of see it's like a slight glow, a slight softness to it, but I want more. I want more of that. So I'm going to turn it on, open it up, and see what controls I have. And you'll see you have a variety of things. You have something called method that will apply different methodology to the soft focusing. But more important, you have a diffuse detail, strength, and a brightness adjustment. Okay, so let's take diffuse detail and let's just crank that all the way up. Let's see what happens. We do that. Let's actually zoom out of this again. And now it's really getting, let's take the strength up as well. Maybe pull the detail deck down a little bit, stick the strength way up on there. Now it's really starting to soften up. It's getting a little dark, so maybe add some brightness to that on top of that. And you can play with the different filters here to find a setting that works. In fact, what I'm going to do is just hit the preset again to reset it all. Go back over here to my strength and crank it up all the way. There we go, because I changed something else when I was messing around and there was not quite what I expected. So now I've got, from the preset, just taken the strength all the way up, and it's got this really creamy, dreamy look to it, but it's too saturated, right? It's too saturated. So is there a saturation slider anywhere in here? And I start poking around, and sure enough, in the duplex one, there's a saturation. Okay, well, I can bring that saturation down a little bit. But if it wasn't in there, let's just pretend that wasn't in there, then I could click on Add Filter. It brings up the filters over here on the left, and I find something that's about saturation. And I know this brilliance and warmth one might do it. There's probably something just called saturation in here as well. We're going to go for the brilliance and warmth. You'll find a lot of crossover in some of the adjustments, and there's a saturation slider, and I can take that down a little bit. And so there's a saturation reduction at the end of that filter path. Cool. So great. That's how we play with the effects. We go through the different presets, we try different things, adjust the sliders, add and remove filters, and just play. It's really, really a tool designed for playing. So this is 1% of Color Effects Pro. Let me back into this, and we're going to jump into another tool. Next, I want to show you how to do this workflow using Photoshop. So we're going to show you 4 different workflows. Next one is going to be Photoshop. Let me see what's going on over here in the chat room. Uh-oh, what happened to? Oh, there it is. Whew. My little palette for GoToWebinar disappeared, and I thought maybe I was offline. That'd be terrible. Let's see here. Let's see if there's any questions here I want to jump onto before we go. Is everybody talking about the video being okay? This is all before the show. Here is a question from Barry. Sure. Oh, another. Oh, wait, I think you already asked me this one. Yep, you already asked me that. That came up again. And Where's Smart Light button? Well, you saw that. We saw that. John Evans, does PhotoLab only work on raw images? Great question. No, you can use it on TIFFs. You can use it on JPEGs. In fact, now that I didn't hit OK for the filter, but you see here the TIFF file that was generated from this raw file. There's the TIFF file, and I can continue to work in there. So you can bring in TIFFs, you can bring in JPEGs, you can bring in any image type. Omar is asking, can I download the Nik Collection 2 directly from the web without any adjustments? I have it bundled with Affinity Photo. I'm not sure what you mean without any adjustments. If you mean without any presets, it comes with all the presets. I'm not quite sure what you mean by without any adjustments. See if you can clarify your question for me, Omar, and I will do my best. Can you print out of PhotoLab? Howard is asking. There is a print menu, but it's not anything exciting. It's just a standard OS print menu. Excuse me, but yes, you can print out of there. Okay. All right, oh, and it looked black and white because all I have is a laser printer, so it's gonna be black and white. All righty, where are we? Photoshop. Let's do that. So let me switch over now to Photoshop. Now, Photoshop gives us some other workflow possibilities. And I'm gonna start by going to open, and we're gonna open a raw image here. I know it's this one right there, so I'm just not gonna wait for the previews, just hit open. And because it's raw, it's gonna open inside of Adobe Camera Raw. Now, for anyone who's used Adobe Camera Raw before, or Photoshop itself, you know that when you open a raw file, this is the first stage. This is your raw decoding process. Photoshop itself is not a raw processing tool. That's what Camera Raw is for. And then once you're done with it, it hands off a Photoshop file. However, some of you who are more advanced users may know that you can open a raw image from Adobe Camera Raw into Photoshop as something called a smart object. When you do that, you have the ability at any time in the workflow to later on, you've already added filters, you've done a bunch of stuff to the photo, to later on go back inside of that smart object and return to the base level raw decoding, which is a really powerful way to work. Now, if you want to do that from this stage, you can't just click the button that says open image. You have to hold down the shift key and it changes to open object. So let me just zoom into that, make sure it's nice and easy to see. By default, it says open image. If I hold down the shift key, it becomes open object. Now, before you do this for the first time, notice down here on the bottom left, let me zoom into that again as well. Right now, mine says Adobe RGB in 16-bit. That's because I've already set this. But if I click that up here, it says what color space you want to open it into and what depth. By default, the first time you do this, it's going to be set to 8-bit. Just like our discussion over in PhotoLab, you want to be in 16-bit. You want to have the flexibility of 16-bit. So set that to 16-bit and that will be sticky. Now any other image that you go to open, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to go to 16-bit. Okay, so we've opened this in the raw decoder. I haven't made any changes to it. We're actually going to do some changes later on. But at this point, I want to open the raw image into Photoshop, leaving it as a smart object. So I hold down the shift key and this becomes smart object or open object. I click on that and it's going to open that up. Now, this is important for two reasons. One, I already told you, because I can at any time go back into the raw file and adjust the raw decode. That's cool, okay. But what's really cool, even if I never want to do that, is because this is now a smart object, a filter that I apply, like the Nik filters, will get applied as a smart filter. A smart filter can be re-edited at any time. If you just add, for example, a blur to this and then go on to do something else, a non-smart smart object, you can never undo that blur. The blur is permanent. But as a smart object with a smart filter, you can go back at any time later and adjust the blur. And the same thing happens with the Nik plugins. So this is a smart object. That layer is selected. I'll go to the filter menu and go to Nik Collection, and I'm going to choose Analog Effects Pro. Now it's going to pop up a little dialog that is going to say we have detected this as a smart object. Just to kind of remind you that that's the case, here it is. It says Analog Effects Pro 2 has identified that the active layer is a smart object and will now operate as a smart filter. It also tells you that the brush button will be deactivated. So for those of you who are familiar with the Nik plugins, if you open a standard photo, a non-smart object into the Nik plugins, once you're into the plugin, you have the ability, once you've made your changes, done whatever you want to do, instead of just hitting OK, to brush that adjustment into the image. So the adjustment is not applied to the whole image. You don't need to do that here because there is a layer mask created for you between the adjustment layers, between the filter and the original image, so you can do the same thing after the fact. You don't need Nik's own built-in brush tool. That's why that tells you that, and that's why that's not there anymore. Okay, so now we're into the Analog Effects Pro, and up here on the top left, workflow is a little bit different than the previous filter. you'll see over here I have a series of tools and tool combinations. These tool combinations are essentially the recipes or the presets, and on the left we see all the different tools that we have. So you have like a basic adjustment, lens distortion, bokeh, and just like before, when I click on any one of these, it replaces the filter over here on the right. If I want to add another one, here, again, the workflow is a little bit different. If I want to add, let's say, dirt and scratches to this, as I hover over it, you'll notice a little plus that comes up here. Let's get nice and close so you can really see it. See how each one, if I hover over, if I just click it, it's just going to add it. But if I click on the plus, then it is going to add that to, oh, I think I deleted that one actually. Oh, there it goes. It adds that to the stack. So now you can see over here, I've got the bokeh and the photo plate that I just added on there. So it adds them to the stack. So same thing as before, it's just the buttons are in different places. And if you're wondering why each tool is a bit different, you really have to go back to the legacy of the Nik Collection. The Nik Collection was originally developed by a company called Nik Software. The tools were developed individually over the course of many, many years, probably about a decade. And each time they developed a new one, they had some new ideas of how to refine the workflow. And as older ones got updated, they kind of incorporated some of the new ideas, and some of them they kind of didn't. And in the end, they're kind of a bit disjointed. And then Google bought the Nik stuff from Nik Software, and they didn't do a whole lot with it. And then more recently, of course, DxO bought it from Google. And so I think the future is quite bright for this, and we could be seeing things start to unify and become a bit more consistent. But for now, we are seeing that original kind of disparity between how things work. Anyway, enough of a history lesson. Let's go back into the camera kits and play with the new camera kits, the En Vogue, and play with some of these. So once again, you click on any one of these presets, you find inspiration, you find the ability to learn about how these work, and on the right-hand side, you have all the different tools that were adjusted to it, that were made. So I'll just click on a few of these just so we can see what some of these look like. There's some really neat ones in here. And you can do things like, okay, so I pull up this one called Burned Edges. Let's say I look at this and I go, I love it, this is cool, but I really don't like the dark edges. I don't like the frame that's on there. Okay, so look over on the right, basic adjustments, bokeh, light leaks, lens vignette, film types, frames. Oh, frames, okay. Well, let's just turn off frames. Oh, perfect, there we go, the frame's gone. Excellent, that's what I want. So you have, again, the total control, turn things on or off as you need. I'm gonna grab this one called Double Exposure, because this one I think is really, really cool, and show you a couple things about how this works, and then we're gonna do something insanely cool and powerful using the smart objects inside of Photoshop. So while that is applying, let me take a quick look over here for any additional questions. Al Krevit says, in lens correction section are all combo lens and bodies offered. So you can get a complete list if you go to the DxO website. It is extensive. Basically, any new camera that gets released gets profiled as quickly as possible. Any significant new camera. I mean, it's not like, you know, every tiny little point and shoot that you buy at Costco kind of thing, but every significant new camera and lens gets, as soon as it's released, it is profiled and added to the database. So if it's brand new, like just hit the market, it might take a couple of months for it to get fully supported, but even without that full support, you can still use it. You just don't have the lens correction tools in there, but then pretty quickly those things come out. In fact, if you go to the DxO website, just DxO.com, there's a blog button on there. You'll probably have to go back a couple of months, but I wrote an article that's on the DxO blog that explains the entire process of developing those profiles. So it's worth a read if you're interested in some of the tech behind how that's done. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay, so now onward. Omar, I see you've rewritten your questions, so we'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, so this particular preset has this double exposure thing going on, and you can see if I look through the adjustments, there's one here called double exposure. If I turn that off, then we lose that whole double exposure thing, but I kind of like it. I think it's kind of cool. It's got this funky little zoomed motion thing happening, and if I run my mouse over it, over this image while that's selected, you'll see we get a fun little interface here. This one here is particularly cool because it allows me to add twist into the image by just clicking and dragging on this little twisty interface thing on there. It's kind of a cool thing. I like it. You can reposition the zoom. You can scale it. You can do a bunch of stuff in here. But I'm going to leave it as it is, right? This is cool. I like it. I like it everywhere except for her face. You look at her face, and her face is now, you can't see her face anymore. This is not good, but I love what it's done around the image. Okay, so what I need to do is have this effect everywhere, but not have the twisty on her face, but I still want all the other effects on her face. So how are we going to do that? Well, this is where these smart objects in the Photoshop document become really, really cool. I'll start by hitting OK and applying this back to Photoshop. And while that's happening, let's take a look at the questions here. Omar, yeah, when I first downloaded the Nik Collection first edition, okay, I had to do some tweaking to get it to work with Affinity Photo. Okay, Affinity Photo compatibility is not something I'm familiar with. I know some people have brought it up, and I think that the DxO guys basically said there's still a little bit of work to do to make it fully compatible, but I think it basically works, but I'm sorry, I don't have a really good answer for that. If you ask me this question again on social media afterwards, I will get a better answer for you, because you're not the first person to ask me, and I don't really know the full answer. Now you want to know if downloading the process is as simple. So okay, so without tweaking. So yeah, do me a favor, ask me that on Twitter later. Alkrevitz, is there still a Nik selection tool panel in Photoshop? Yes, I've just disabled it because it bugs me. What he's talking about is when you first launch Photoshop, it'll come up with a little tool palette that comes up that offers to take you straight into Nik plugins. I never used it, so there's a preference in there to turn that off, so that's why it's gone. But yes, it does still exist. Okay, we're back in Photoshop. Now, this smart object, the original file there, now has a smart filter applied to it. So let me pan this out. So there's the smart object. There's the smart filter. This is a mask between the layers of the smart object and the smart filters. I could go into that mask and paint it, but that would reveal the original image, which is not what I want. Remember, I don't want to have just the original face. I want to have the face with all the effects minus the swirly twirly. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this layer. Duplicate that, and I'm going to call it twistless. I don't know, whatever that works. Twistless. Okay. So it's going to duplicate that layer. It's going to take a moment because it has to re-render all of the work that I've just done to this second layer. And incidentally, this is a pretty old Mac that I'm using right now. It's quite a 4-year-old 5K iMac. It's just kind of my ideal demo machine, so I use it for this. But it is a little bit slower than a more modern machine would be here. While that's happening, let's take a quick look at the other question. Jimmy Taylor, I already have the old version installed with plugins. Okay, do I need to uninstall this version first, or will the new version override it or create new additional versions? The installer will walk you through that. Honestly, I've run through so many beta versions, I'm not sure what the process is exactly. But if you purchase the new version or the upgrade, because you depending on when you bought the original version, you might qualify for an upgrade. All of that is on the DxO website. It'll walk you through the process, so I wouldn't worry about it. And there are instructions on there on how to make sure that you retain your custom presets if you have made your own. Okay, and you won't have to keep both versions. All of your old presets are compatible with the new one, so that's good to know. Okay, all right, so here we go. We have now 2 identical layers right now. I need to change the top layer, so I'm going to double click on the Analog Effects Pro line right here. That takes me back into the plugin where all the work that I had done before is still applied. It's telling me again that it's a smart layer. You can disable that. I leave it on just so I don't forget to tell you guys about it. And once I'm in here, I'm going to get rid of the twist, but leave everything else. I'll take a moment to load those up. And again, if you have questions while we're going, drop into the questions there. As you can see in here, I am jumping into those as much as I can. We have addressed all the questions that are up there now. So if you want more questions answered, get them in there. All right, so this is now loaded up. We're back where we started. I'm going to go into the double exposure, and I could just disable it, but there's kind of a lot that's happened in there that I do want some of that on, so just disabling it isn't quite going to give me the effect that I want. So I'm going to re-enable it, and then I'm going to go in and let's see here. Let's get rid of some of the zoom. In fact, I'm going to do it using the interface here. I'm just going to take the zoom down and realign this. So this second layer, you can see, has been shifted into a different position. And I'm just going to realign it with the original image. It'll still be a little bit blurry, and that's okay. So I should take the zoom all the way down. And that's okay, because I don't want it to be a flawless image. If I did want it to be flawless, I would just turn this off altogether. And let's see, actually, I think that works. I'm going to leave it like that. Okay, good. So now I hit OK. So this is going to render back in. So now I'm going to have 2 versions of this in the same document, the one with the twist and the one without. So we got the big double exposure and one without the big double exposure. So here's the one without. That's on top. If I hide that, there's the original one underneath it. So now what I want to do is create a mask, not paint the mask between the filter and the image, but between this image and the one underneath it. So I'll select the image, enable the mask. It's enabled. I'm going to hit Command-I to invert the mask. You'll see this goes from white to black. So now I don't see the top image at all. And I'll hit B to bring up the brush key. Bring up the brush. I'm going to make sure I've got a nice big soft brush on there, and yes I do. Make sure that my brush is set to white, and it is, and I'm just going to paint over her face. So what I've just done, you can see the mask over here that I've created. I have painted a mask so that I only see her face from this layer, but then I see everything else from the background one. If I hide the background, you see that's all we have from the foreground, from the top layer. Bring that back up, and there we go. So this is a really, really powerful way to work, because again, at any time I can go back and re-edit any of this. In fact, I can even double click on the smart object here. It takes me back into the raw decode, and I can affect the raw image itself. Pretty powerful way to work. Okay, that's another way. So now next one we're going to do, let me just close all of this, is we're going to go into Lightroom Classic. So Lightroom Classic is going to be a very, very traditional workflow in here. People have been using this for years and years and years. Nothing has changed. So in here, I'm going to start by doing some basic exposure adjustments. You'll see that it's a little bit overexposed, so I'll take my exposure down a little bit. Maybe not that much. Take the exposure down, maybe do a little bit of highlight recovery as well, just to do some basic stuff in here. Maybe add a little bit of a vignette. If I can remember where vignetting is in here. Oh, trying to effects. I think it's under effects. Here we go. A little vignetting. Add that into there. Okay. So this is cool. This is a good baseline image. This is where I'm going to start. Now I want to send it to a Nik plugin. I have two choices from here. Two choices to send it to a Nik plugin. I can go to the photo menu. Yes, the photo menu, and choose edit in and choose one of the filters in here. Or I can open this as a smart object in Photoshop. Now, if I open it as a smart object in Photoshop, we're going to be back to the same workflow that we just had, where this raw image is going to be opened as a raw smart object inside of Photoshop. So really, really powerful, flexible workflow, reiterating exactly what I just showed you. Or I can just send this straight off to a filter, in which case it's going to render out as a TIFF file and open that in Photoshop. So that's what we're going to do this time, just to show a different workflow. And I'm going to use Silverfix Pro. That's what we're going to do. So it asks what type of a TIFF do I want to send. I mean, I could also send a PSD or JPEG. Again, don't know why you do a JPEG. I can do a TIFF, 16-bit. It's all good. Excellent. Hit edit. It's going to render that out and take me in there. Now, there's also a kind of half and half workflow. There's a lot of workflow options here, and I realize there's a lot to keep track of, but whatever tool you're primarily using, you will find that you'll figure out the workflow and you work with it very quickly. But we talked about from Lightroom Classic that you can open as a smart object in Photoshop, and that sends the raw image to Photoshop as a raw smart object. Or we can do this where we just send off the filter. Another thing that you could do is go through Photoshop and render it as a TIFF, so that it's no longer raw, but then make the TIFF a smart object so you can still re-edit the filter later. There's a whole bunch of different workflows. It's kind of funky, but different ways you can go about doing it. Okay, so here we are in Silverfix Pro 2. Let's make this nice and big. And once again, over here on the left-hand side, we've got all our different presets, and we're going to be focusing on the new ones, the En Vogue. Now, this tool works a bit differently than the previous ones in that we don't have a series of filters that we're adding different filters to it. We are instead adjusting on the right-hand side all of the filters, and we just play with the different adjustments that we have in there. So you have finishing adjustments, film types, color filter, selective adjustments, and the global adjustments in here. Again, these are not individual filters. This is just the collection of tools that we have to work with. So slightly different workflow than other apps. But once again, we will start with the presets. So let's click on a few of these. So there's one called Dark Glow. It's kind of cool. Do this highlight fade. Nice little, well, it's highlighted, it's bright, and it's a bit faded. Intensifier, I like that one, kind of like really gritty on there. More silver, it adds a very strong silver type of a look to it. This ominous fade one's a bit scary looking, but that's another cool one. Take all these different great presets, and once again, you try the presets, you go over to the right hand side, and you start looking at the sliders to see what has been affected in here. Now, one of the things I also want to point out is when you do load up a preset, let's go for say intensifier here. If I want to see what this looks like without the preset applied, you do have a couple different ways to go about doing that. Up here in the top, you'll see there is a compare button. So if I just click and hold that, it shows me the original. And notice here, you're seeing an original black and white conversion. So it's a total baseline black and white conversion without any effects applied, which is better than at this point seeing the color version. And you're going, okay, that doesn't help. Going from color to extreme black and white. I just need to see the difference of what these filters that I've applied so far are doing to it. So we've got that on there. That looks pretty good like that. I like that. Or I can do a split screen. I can do this split screen in here, so I can drag these side to side. And this you'll find in all of the tools. Or there is a side-by-side comparison, which is really powerful as well. So you really want to be able to keep an eye on the original while you're working on the new version. You can do that too. But I'll just go back to the full affected one and then play with some of the sliders in here. So for example, You've got under here finishing adjustments. So you could do like a vignette. This is actually kind of cool. Let's go to the vignette, and I'll add a vignette in here. It seems like the kind of image that I want to put a big vignette on. But because of the framing where her head is at the top, I'm getting this vignetting across her forehead. It's not really going to work out for me. So instead of doing a vignette, let me just reset that. I'll use this tool underneath it called Burn Edges. And Burn Edges allows me to burn each edge, left, right, top, and bottom, individually. So I could start with a preset of like all edges 1 or 2, which actually will save some time. So I'll do all edges 2. And then down here, you'll see that I have controls over the left, the top, the right, and the bottom side of it. So let's go to that top one and take the strength down because it's a little bit too strong on her forehead. And then I'll go to the bottom one and I take the strength up and the size of that up and the transition up, make it really nice, smooth transition, and really add a nice big burn across the bottom of that. I can do the same thing on the left and right on there as well. Now let's go in and play with the structure. The structure in the black and white is what gives you that really sharp, gritty look to it. And if I take the structure up on here and just crank it up a little bit, you can see her face just becomes super textured. It's kind of the exact opposite of what you do if you're photographing a young model, but on older faces, I love it. I think it looks so cool. You get this really gritty, hard look on there. And you can go in and add more structure into the highlights specifically. If we zoom in close here, you'll see that structure gives you a global structure or highlight, midtone, shadows, and even a fine structure detail, really allowing you to get some very, very precise looks to this. I mean, if I do a little before and after again, you see just how dramatic and different this has become. One more thing I'm going to show you in here. I'm not going to really teach you how to use this right now because it's quite advanced, but for those of you who understand the Ansel Adams zone system, the zone system is built into Silver Efex Pro. If you go down here to the bottom, you'll see under here where it says loop and histogram. If I open that up, these down here represents the 11 zones of 0 through 10. And as I hover over these, notice on the image, let me find one that's really dramatic. That's a good one. So that's zone 4. Look at the image and see all the hash marks, the hash lines that are on the image. That's showing me where that zone is landing. So I can see exactly what zones I am or am not hitting, and I can even click on them to highlight them. So let's say that I wanted to ensure that I got data into or out of a particular zone. I could select the zone on there, it stays highlighted on the screen, and then I go make adjustments until parts of the image go into or out of that zone, whatever it is I'm trying to achieve in there. Super, super powerful for those who are really into the very, very precise black and white editing. So there's a very quick tour of Silver Efex Pro. Again, tons of stuff in here, tons of great new presets. Don't have time to do it all. The last thing I'm going to do, we got 10 minutes left to wrap this up. The last thing I'm going to do is show you how this works out of Lightroom CC, the new one. It's actually not called Lightroom CC anymore. So confusing. It's just Lightroom, and this is Lightroom desktop versus Lightroom mobile. But this is the new Lightroom that is the cloud-based one. Again, it does not have a plugin architecture yet, and I say yet out of the pure hope that they are going to put a plugin architecture in here someday. But for now, it doesn't. So you can't use any plugins. This is not a DxO Nik thing. This is any plugins from any manufacturer you cannot use natively inside of Lightroom. But you do still have access to Photoshop, which of course does have the plugin support. So an image like this one here, which I've already done the distortion correction and so on here in Lightroom, if I go to the file menu and choose edit in Photoshop, it is going to render that as a TIFF file and open it up into Photoshop. Now, once it's in Photoshop, I could convert that TIFF layer to a smart object, which will give me the ability to re-edit the filter, but it doesn't give me access to the raw file. If you actually want full raw process like we had from going Lightroom Classic to open a smart object or going from Photoshop and opening as a smart object, if that's what you wanted to do, you could, but you have to, it's a very convoluted workflow. You have to export the raw image from Lightroom desktop to the desktop or somewhere, and then in Photoshop, open as a smart object, do all your work, save it, and then re-import it back in. So it's a really clumsy workflow, but if that's what you want to do, you can. I went the easy route. I just said open in Photoshop. Here's my Photoshop image. Again, I could go in here now and convert this to a smart object, which will allow me to reopen the filter at any time, or I can choose not to do that and just do it the old-fashioned way and just do the effect. In fact, I'm going to hit undo, so we are just doing it the traditional way in here. Now I'll go to Filter, Nik Collection, and choose, where are we? HDR Efex Pro, and see what we can do here. Now remember in the beginning I said, excuse me, remember in the beginning I said that we would be doing HDR with a single image. So we're not doing the full-on, multiple image blending together to do HDR. This is more about getting an HDR look to a single image in here. So with this, once again, on the left-hand side, a bunch of different presets, including our new on Vogue categories. This one works like Silver FX Pro in that on the right-hand side, you have all the adjustments. You're not adding individual filters. It's simply a collection of adjustments. Each preset on the left is a collection of adjustments on the right. So I go through here and I click on an individual one of these, and you see, of course, we have all these different looks on here. We find one that looks good on this. HDR looks is obviously very, very subjective. Some people love it, some people don't. You find what works for you. And I'm going to start off with this image here, with this preset here called Warm Deep. I like the overall look. It's a little bright, so we're going to pull that down a little bit. And it's done some really cool structure things to the building up here. If I do a compare on there, we can see, oh, there's a baseline image. We don't really want to see the baseline. Well, I guess we're not going to see the original, but we have some cool structure that's happening up here in this, I don't know, stucco or whatever it is, which I really want to amplify. So we're going to do a couple things. First, let's open tonality and take the exposure down just a little bit. We get a little bit darker in there. And then I'm going to take the structure and I'm going to crank that all the way up. Let's take it way, way up in there. And take a look at what's happening here. Like this up here, it looks so cool right now. It's like glowing. It's almost like there's candlelight inside of here, something that's all glowing and beautiful, but it has done something awful to the background. See the boats and the water down there? It's really not looking pretty. So now we're going to use viewpoints again, and I'm going to use viewpoints in a really cool and powerful way. So let's see here. I'm going to get my palette here out of the way. Where am I? I want to go to, here we go, selective adjustments. I'm going to take the structure down a little bit on here. Just take it back down over the whole thing. I don't want structure, this much structure on the whole image. I want to do it just on part of the image. So let me take that back down a little. Right about there's a good starting point. And then I go to my selective adjustments and I grab a control point and I'm going to start by just clicking on the wall back there. And just like when we were inside of PhotoLab, when I first add it, nothing happens. We haven't made any changes. I can make this bigger or smaller. But I want to really see what I'm going to affect. So to do that in here, just like in PhotoLab, you have the masks view. Here it is represented by this little icon right here. So this little mask icon. If I click this box, it is going to show me the mask view for that selected adjustment. And now, just like before, I can move this around and in real time get an idea of what will be affected. And I want to affect the wall, but not the water. And so like this is great because it's affecting this part of the wall up here, this part here, not this, but kind of there. Well, that's not really quite right. So I drag around just a little bit more and that's closer, but I'm not getting any of this up here. So I just kind of keep dragging around until I find an area that gives me more of what I want. And I'm going to go back to this for the sake of the demo. We'll say this is what I want here, except that it is affecting some of the sky and the water back there. Not a whole lot, but it is affecting it. So I want to block that out. And this is where advanced viewpoint stuff comes in really, really handy. So over here on the right, we have our control points. I already added one. I'm going to click on this to add another one. And I'm going to click on the sky. Now notice that the sky just went black. It went black because I am viewing the mask for the main one, my main control point, but not for the second one. The control points kind of do battle, if you will. They battle each other out. They cancel each other out. So right now, the main control point 1, will affect everything that's in white and nothing that is not in white. In this case, by adding this control point to the sky, I am protecting the sky. I could even, I made it a little bit bigger. It's getting even more of it. I could option drag this to make another one. If that's, let's try that again. Option drag this to make another one and protect another part of the image if I wanted to do that. But I'm just going to leave it there to protect that part of it and disable the mask. So now what I know is that this tool right here, just hide the mask there. There we go. Oh, I just hit return accidentally. Didn't mean to do that and is now applying this effect. I'm gonna have to redo that. Do I have time for this? I do. I have 4 minutes. Undo, back into the filter. Didn't mean to hit that button. Oops. Another good reason to have the smart filter. If I had a smart filter, I could have just double clicked and gone right back into it and made changes, but now I'm gonna have to start over again. I chose the wrong day to not use a smart filter. Okay, it's coming up, it's coming up. Let's see while that's coming, let's see if there's any questions in here. Al Crevice, so if I don't need to use the PhotoLab, you can just access from Photoshop and Nik Collection like I normally did, correct? Same Nik choices, but with more presets, correct, sir. Prakash says, is there a user manual help for Nik Collection so we can figure out what the different options do? I'm not sure how much of a user manual there is, honestly. No one's ever asked me that before. I don't know the answer to that. There's got to be some kind of, I mean, there's a million tutorials, but I don't actually honestly know. I'm sorry. That's a silly thing. Where was my plugin? It loaded. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. Too many things running at once in here. Oh, it just applied the plugin. Oh, I selected that there. I was thinking that it was going to open it, and it just applied it. Okay, now we're really short on time. Can I do this in 3 minutes? Yes, I can. I can go a little bit long. Hope you guys don't mind, but I will do my best to wrap this up on time. That's loading. Let's see, back over here. Joel, great stuff. When bringing a photo into color effect or other, what resolution should we use? It doesn't matter. Resolution is irrelevant. That only matters for when you go to print. And if you're printing in your own studio at home, then you can readjust that at the end. Resolution is totally irrelevant. All that really truly matters is the actual pixel count. Okay, back into this warm deep. Okay, we're gonna rapid fire this. Warm deep. I want to take the exposure down a little bit. I want to take the selective control points, click onto the stucco wall there, enable the mask so that I see it. Let's get this into an area where I'm affecting more of the area there. That's pretty good. Okay, add another control point to protect the sky, make that nice and big. Perfect. Hide the mask, go back to the first control point and take the structure slider and crank that all the way up. So now I've just added all this structure into the wall here without affecting the background. And since I already have a mask in the background, I can now go in here and do something like take the exposure of that down a little bit to make it a bit darker and really give me that rich look that I'm after in there. Cool. So that's how that works. That's what I wanted to show you with them. Now when I hit OK, it'll take me back in, apply this, of course, and bring me back to Photoshop, at which point when I hit save in Photoshop, it will save it back into Lightroom CC, which of course is where we started. So that is everything I wanted to show you. Excellent. All right, let me pull up the questions to see if there's any more that I want to address here. I'm going to stop showing my screen and see, you can still see me, I do believe, yes. And let's take a look. Joel, let's see here. John Evans saying thank you. Howard Frank, any new functionality in plugins or just in digital presets? There's no additional sliders or specific features in the presets themselves. There is the presets, there are bug fixes, there is the high DPI support for Windows users, and of course the Nik, Photo Lab that is now included in there as well. And oh, perfect. That was the last question. Excellent. All right, guys. Hey, thank you so much for tuning in. Once again, you should be getting an email in about an hour confirming that you saw it and showing you the video, a capture of it. Do me a favor. Somebody, because I don't know if that actually is gonna work. We just turned it on. Somebody tweet me at PhotoJoseph in about an hour and let me know if you've gotten that or not and if it actually worked out for you. New thing. I didn't even know we could do this. I turned it on right before the show and hopefully it works. Yeah, and that's that. Hey, thanks again, everybody. Super appreciate it. Again, if you come up with any questions afterwards, feel free to hit me on Twitter or go to YouTube, youtube.com/PhotoJoseph. You can grab any one of my videos there and post a question on there. I usually see those, but Twitter is probably one of the easiest ways to be sure you get my attention. All right, with that, folks, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.